Thank you for joining us today for Staying Ahead of the Spark, Lithium-Ion Battery Fire Prevention. My name is Kristin Aldred with Stericycle, which is now part of WM. Just a couple of reminders, please put your phone on silent mode. And if we have some time near the end of the discussion, we'll have questions. We have a couple folks who can bring microphones to the audience. And then following the session, you'll see a QR code. We encourage you to please take a survey, give some feedback. It helps NWRA with planning future events. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump in. I'll introduce our panelists. We have Ryan Fogelman, VP of Fire Protection from Fire Rover, Frederickson, VP of Operations for the Battery Network, and Chris Ball, VP of Environmental Health and Safety from WM. So to kick things off, we just want to set the stage a little bit. I think that everybody here understands that the improper disposal of lithium-ion batteries can create fast-moving fires that are difficult to extinguish, and battery fires have really become a priority for our industry and a big safety concern. I think Michael mentioned in the last session just the volume of fires. NWRA did a study recently. There are more than 5,000 fires nationally at materials recovery facilities across the US each year. So I'd like to kick things off by just talking a little bit about what's driving this. Why do things seem to be accelerating? And Ryan, starting with you, what trends are you seeing at facilities?
It's a big question, and again, I think, if you take a step back and you look at the fact that we've had inherent risk of fires in waste and recycling industries forever, right? And we've really added in the lithium-ion batteries in 15, 16, 17, and we saw a huge wave come in 18. The study that NWRA did, it was only for single-stream MRFs, and it was really what I worked with Michael on it, and basically what we were finding was, there was a couple issues, right? One was your insurance issues. So the insurers, from a risk mitigation perspective, they're getting nervous. So they started pulling out of the industry. Now we feel like we're bringing them back, right? Because we're mitigating those risks with education, operational best practices and technologies. I think really the biggest thing was that fires cost about $2,600 per incident, but the big fires are costing $22 million. And that number was from 3 years ago as well. I actually, when I do my reported fires, I'm looking at publicly reported fires in waste and recycling, and I've always been uberly conservative. So EPA has come out and all these others. So the real number of actual fires and the real, the hockey stick that we're seeing is, and we just had the worst year of waste and recycling publicly reported fires. And the reason I do those is that they're usually the 2-alarm, 3-alarm, 4-alarm, 7-alarm fires that really, make the news, make the media. So, it's one of those things that we are just seeing an increase, right? I mean, it's, scrap fires are up, waste and recycling facility fires are up, electronic facility fires are up, and it's all due to the fact that you now have a match that lights all of these traditional hazards that you've had for years and years. So, I mean, there's really no other way, to look at it.
Chris, Ryan mentioned insurance and, talked a lot about the increase in incidents, but also that fires have been a concern for a long time. What's really brought this to the forefront for waste industry leaders?
Yeah, I think that there's at least twofold in play here. So, as WM, we're up to a workforce of 60,000 people, more than 20,000 trucks on the road, several hundred landfills out there. So, in recycling facilities and transfer stations, and we're seeing the fire sort of piece at every step along that chain. There's fires in trucks, there's fires in transfer stations, fires in recycling facilities. So I think the sort of uniformity of it and the increasing wave is certainly what's, piquing a lot of the interest. And when you think about it, I mean, look, every one of us is in this room, has one of these batteries on us. And if you've done any traveling around DC, one of the things that has always stood out with me around DC is just the predominance of scooters, bikes, and you think about just the thousands and thousands of batteries that are just around us at any given point. We have the gift in our sector of being the place where things go away, right? So we collect these things and harness them, and so we're just seeing this wave of batteries coming down the pike at us. And WM, one of my favorite things about WM is just as a company with a really people-first mindset, we try and think about it certainly through the lens of facility and risk and insurance, but just about our people, and our people are tasked with dealing with fires on a day in and day out basis, and are we arming them with the right resources and protection so that they can keep getting through their day safely, every day. And I think that awareness, as you keep hearing the stories of people having to encounter fires from our teammates, is really what's continually driving that awareness.
Eric, is there anything that you want to call out specifically that maybe operators don't understand or aren't recognizing about this issue?
To kind of take a step back, one of the questions that was embedded in your first question was the question of why. And I think the industry is already well attuned to the what. There's a term that I use for a lot of things. Could apply, for example, to a driver rejecting a load using a pickup, of a well-intended but misguided. And what we see a lot of is, particularly as consumer behaviors change and looking towards more circularity, whether it's from an environmental perspective or even from a secure domestic supply chains perspective, we're seeing a well-intended but misguided consumer that wants to do the right thing. And there's just a lot of touches on mixed stream recycling. So we've got a blue bin that you put everything in. It's got to be touched so many times, and every time you get a touch, you get an opportunity for a fire, you get an opportunity for a crush, a shred. And so we've got an increase in well-intended but misguided consumers throwing batteries in the same bin that they throw a can in. And then we also get, when we look at the rise in electrification, consumer portable electrification, the introduction of lithium-ion batteries, one kind of hallmark, the Toyota Prius converted from a nickel metal hydride battery, so a different chemistry, different, much lower fire risk, to lithium-ion in 2016. And so then 10 years later, we're starting to see things come off the road. And similarly too, the introduction of batteries just really being everywhere, it's been on a steep upward trajectory, and now those things are coming at end of life, and we have a well-intended but misguided consumer population that's starting to throw them away. So this is not the beginning of the end, this is just the end of the beginning for this problem.
So we have an incredibly complex, difficult, large, and growing problem in the industry. Let's talk a little bit about prevention and operations and some of the steps that operators can take to prevent fires at facilities or on trucks, and what the biggest vulnerabilities are in the collection system, in trucks, in MRFs, or elsewhere, and what should operators be looking out for? What should employees be trained to look out for?
Yeah, I'm happy to take a swing. Look, I mentioned already, we try and start everything with through the lens of our frontline employees. And when you're thinking about residential trash collection driver, we have one here, one of our residential driver of the year winners who's here. You would love to train him up and so he can figure out where there's a lithium-ion battery in a residential trash can, but the reality is it's probably in most of them, and also he can't see in there. So there's not much you can do on that front. So instead we try and really lean in on making sure our drivers, our transfer station and recycling facility operators really understand what the expectations are, both in terms of what they'll do if they see signs of batteries or fire, and really most importantly what they won't do, really putting the parameters on that, because your best employees are going to be those ones who are really going to want to bend over backwards, go above and beyond to try and put out a fire, and they'll put themselves in harm's way. And so to really make sure that they understand that that is not the expectation of their employer, and that really some of the fire response, once a fire moves past that incipient stage, is really left to the Fire Rovers of the world and the fire professionals is one of the keys there. And what we found is that if you really drill that, if you really embed that in your employees' mentality, that's a company that's trying to protect you, not expecting you to run up a transfer facility waste pile with a garden hose to put something out. So
It's really talking about building a safety culture, and so those steps that you
making sure that they know and are constantly reinforced that they have stop work authority, and that if they are on route, what the expectations both are and are not of them, for handling fires.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, if I can, kind of add to that, right? So, we're looking at it from an employee. I mean, it's a bad kept secret in the industry that employees have been fighting these fires for 100 years, right? So they are on the front lines. And the reality is that you do have what the fire departments call the hero, right? Who, they love their job, they love their company, they love everything that they do, and they're willing to put themselves at risk. And again, with batteries, we see projectiles, we see toxic fumes that come off these things. And then you also have to make sure that the fire department, when they come, if we're talking about a major catastrophic loss, the fire department, they don't want to fight these fires either. When they look at like MSW, they have to consider it hazard material because we don't know what's in it. So really, I mean, thank you for mentioning Fire Rover. I mean, our goal is to get the employees and the first responders really focusing on those 6 to 10 minutes when you can really make a difference and you can really stop these things in their tracks. And like Waste Management, you guys have made a huge investment in it. And it's really, if you're gonna have your employees fight, here's the parameters of when you should and how you should. And the fire department, they need to really know, like, you have to have your plan ready. You don't wanna have your plan that you create at 2 o'clock when there's a fire at 2 a.m. in the morning, right? You gotta make sure that they come over, they have pizza, they talk to you guys, they understand where your portable systems are, they understand where the employees potentially could be. And so we're trying to keep that communication going because at the end of the day, if you're not there, then they're just containing it. And they're putting a 75-foot or 50-foot containment hose. And really, that's where you're seeing a lot of these buildings, that they just kind of let go. And honestly, in the US, we do an amazing job. In Europe, they really let them go. And that's why you see so many catastrophic losses there. And the biggest thing is that waste and recycling operators are the ones paying for this, right? So we as the public are demanding more and more personal storage, personal electronics, and it's the firefighters who bear the cost as the front lines, and then waste and recycling operators and insurers, those are the ones who are basically paying for this, right? And so this is where the tobacco industry and other industries need to really get their seat at the table. And I mean, you're amazing helping and sitting there, but we need to get as many other interested parties helping to fund the solution to this problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a problem that the waste and recycling industry should be bearing the cost of. There's nothing in your top line to fund this, but one of the efforts, the kind of the shifts that we were incredibly supportive of are campaigns. For anybody who's studied risk for a long time, there's a now kind of antiquated, but I still like it, risk structure called the Heinrich risk triangle. And the incidents are at the top of the triangle. And the way that and there's mathematical ratios it goes all the way to the bottom. The base of the triangle is at-risk behaviors. And for every 30,000 at-risk behaviors, there's a number of close calls, there's a number of near misses, there's a number of minor incidents, right? And then and the way that you reduce the number at the top is by addressing the behaviors at the bottom. You shrink the entire triangle. So the shift towards taking the messaging to that consumer to try and keep them out of the waste stream and to educate on what to actually do. So for example, campaigns like NWRA's Skip the Bin, Turn It In, and the language matters, right? So it's not recycle your battery, because that can drive that well-intended but misguided behavior. But then there is the point that Ryan kind of touched on there for a second, is that there's real cost with all of this, including, for those of you that don't know the Battery Network, we were founded in 1994, we're a 501c3. Consumer facing collection programs is our historical focus. We're industry founded and industry funded. But if we could collect batteries and do it profitably, we wouldn't need to operate as a nonprofit. Mm-hmm. There's far more cost associated with collecting batteries than there's value in the batteries themselves.
I definitely want to come back to education and collection, because that's kind of my favorite topic. But just staying on operations for a little bit. So we've talked about safety culture, we've talked about relationships with your local fire department, about planning. What about technology and how that's evolving and how that can be used in operations to prevent incidences? And maybe just talk a little bit about early detection in preventing, you described smaller fires and sort of more catastrophic fires. Can you talk a little bit about technology in the early?
I can, and again, I think early detection is a misnomer, right? So, I mean, so basically early detection, there's a lot of companies out there that do early detection. With what we do with the human operator is that we do the earliest detection, right? So we're looking at every piece of hay in a haystack to find the needle. We've never had an accidental spray, right? We don't have to turn our system off at 9 in the morning or during the day when everyone's operating, because these are very complex. You're talking about large trucks and folks and forklifts and all these things that can happen. So we look at every trigger in it, but like the big thing is really managing that 6 to 10 minutes between when you caught that fire and how fast you get water on it and how you do it correctly. And that's really a really big piece. I'm really excited because we got our FM certification as a primary system, but we just found out about 30 days ago, we got our first data sheet. And so they are saying that you can use a Fire Rover system in lieu of a standard sprinkler heads in tip floors, bailing operation, bunkers, and storage operations. So it is, this is, it's the waste and recycling industry has been so supportive of what we do, and I completely appreciate it. But it's also, we're in the fire industry and we're trying to change the way that all folks would have to fight these fires on the front lines. So, and there are a ton of other technologies as well. X-rays, the X-ray sorting is pulling them out. But again, you bring a truck in and you have 1,000 batteries, what are you gonna do, right? You can't slow down the process because then it becomes too expensive, so.
So let's talk about that a little bit, Chris. From the operator standpoint, there are different technologies. How do you evaluate them, and how do you just, decide what has the best return on your investment?
You say trial by fire? Is that, no? No, I think it's incumbent on all of us to keep trying in all these avenues. The reality of what we're dealing with is this enormous and growing problem without a silver bullet right now. Can technology ultimately provide a silver bullet in some ways? Maybe, but we're not there yet. In the meantime, WM, and I'm sure a lot of the other leaders in the sector, are trying what we can by way of different detections and suppression and response approaches, and just keep looking to see what works the most effectively. The real challenge that I've seen so far is that yes, there's some really good technologies that are especially starting to be able to spot batteries and larger batteries as they're going down something like a sorting line. It's much trickier though to try and flag those batteries as they're getting dumped into a pile either at a MRF or at a transfer facility coming off the line. And so that ultimately is one of the bigger operational challenges. How do you get that early detection even then? And if you do, what do you do with it, right? So because you flagged a battery inside, a recycling truck. What do you do next? And do you carve through there and do everything to stop the line and pull it out or not? There are major, operational challenges ahead of us. And those of you who attended the last session, heard Tara say nicely, like one of the things we're really proud about is the investments we've made in our MRFs. They've done an amazing job of increasing the quality of the end product coming out of our recycling facilities in there, and we very much want to do everything we can to make sure that all that infrastructure that we've invested in, stays viable and operational and safe. And so trying to make sure we do that before any of those batteries go into those sorting lines is definitely of paramount interest to us.
If I can say one more thing, but so a lot of times when you're sending like a paper bale out, we work with the paper, the paper mills, right? And they're bringing them in. So getting that sorting and grabbing those out will stop a fire down the road at a lot of other types of facilities. So it really is trying to see where the benefit is for that dollar. And really it's the mitigation of risk is that big piece, and it's the entire supply chain that affects it, right? So in my mind, the contamination piece is where the big focus has been for a lot of the big operators, and honestly, that's really where it needs to be, where it needs to stay.
I think one of the challenges with technology is that technology is not a standalone, that it has to be integrated into codes and standards and the way that underwriters look at risk. You will see NFPA 855, which is a energy storage standard. You will see it start to get applied and oftentimes misapplied to people who do pull out waste batteries or collect them intentionally, and because they're not just a scrap, right? It's a whole separate collection stream. So you start to see standards misapplied. You start to see concepts like building a sacrificial burn storage facility like that are very, very different from what underwriters and authorities having jurisdiction, your AHA, your local fire marshal, very different from what they're accustomed to. And so I want to note that while the technology is moving very fast, for anybody who sits on any code standards or does work with the insurance industry, continuing to align risk reduction technology with what that industry looks for risk prevention and reduction, there's still a lot of work to be done there as well.
And you're closer to the manufacturers. Are there any developments on that side of things that would improve safety down the line?
The primary focus of manufacturers for risk reduction is going to be midlife, like while it's being used. The problem with the challenges we're having here as it relates to the manufacturer's role in this, you can take the best battery in the world with built-in technology to prevent the fire from spreading, and if you run over it with a front loader, or you throw it in a shredder, right? It's got all the standard, it's got a UN 38.3 test report, it's got meeting the applicable state, it's gonna catch on fire, right? It's like, Brian and I burn batteries together, right? Like, you can take the best battery out there, and you can force it in a thermal run. Yeah, and it's not very hard because physical damage will do it. And so I think we need to be a little mindful of whether or not there's going to be a silver bullet on the manufacturing side, because even if they build a better battery, and anybody who says that, oh, that's a safer lithium-ion battery, one of the safer types of batteries just puts off far more gas that's flammable. So they don't explode, they just release far more volatile gas. So that's not really safer.
Well, and I think just like, and I hate to, because you always see this in the media, that this new battery or this new thing, and like I've had the pleasure of speaking at the Argonne National Laboratory a couple times, and I'm asking these scientists like, oh, you've created solid state batteries, this is amazing, like when's it commercializing? Because you're literally 10 years down the road, and like what Eric was saying about end of life, like in 15, 16, when I started like really looking at these, like it was end of life that was scaring me. It wasn't what we were seeing on the tip floors. And so I mean, the reality is for all these batteries to work through the system, and we're talking trillions, right? Like we're not talking, I mean, we are literally talking trillions. So, for all them to work through, there is no silver bullet on, I mean, again, in my mind, it's education, it's technology, and it's operational best practice. And you gotta get the kids early, because we have a habit in this country of throwing stuff in the recycling bin or the waste bin, and we expect it to be the magic bin that disappears. And we need to get to the kids early. So like we're working on a book called Supercharged with NWRA, SWANA, the National Fire Protection Association, and really teaching the 6-year-olds and the 8-year-olds of the world, and anyone who wants to, and we're donating all of our time. So any company that wants to be involved, we're happy to do it, because you really got to change that behavior early on, and it's hard, and it's going to take 10 years, but we're going to need it, because it's going to take 10 years to get that solid state battery that's going to actually work. So.
I don't think people understand. I know I didn't really understand until I saw it. What happens when something goes onto a tip floor, and that things are crushed or moved around. Just what happens to them after something's collected. So I think people.
It's not ginger.
It's not delicate.
Well, we're rough on our trash, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you could literally stop the problem if you pre-sorted every single load that came out of every single person's house. The problem's solved, right? But everybody's out of business. And we need the rare earth metals, which is the biggest problem here. They have no value, but as an organization, as a company, as Americans, right, like we need to have those rare earth metals, because that's what's gonna power the next generation.
I've also become, so as I was learning more about this issue, I have a lawnmower, a weed whacker, a chainsaw. I was so happy because I switched it all to electric, and now I have 4 decent sized batteries in my garage, and I think about that all the time, because
If you go to the batterynetwork.com/locator,
you got it.
then there are over 20,000 free public facing accessible collection
Yeah.
sites, including ones for e-bike batteries and lawnmower batteries.
No, and joking aside, because I mean, you should take all the self-promo you can, right? But you know, what we talked about in the last panel was you need to have ease, right? Like if you don't have ease, recycling doesn't happen. If you don't have ease combined with education, recycling doesn't happen. And it's the exact same dynamic here, right? People don't know what the heck to do with their batteries, and unless until we do a better job of educating, that's just going to keep happening. And I think they need to know where all those spots are. Like I think we should all be sort of trumpeting, you know, to all of our customers, this is how to do it, you know, because there is existing a lot of confusion, you know, out there, sure, combined with laziness, which, you know, doubles down on the problem. So.
Well, and let me just say, like, the vape effect, which is why I'm seeing all these other fires, it's like, so I came out with the vape effect a year ago, and the whole idea, and again, I mean, you knew I was gonna bring this up at some point, but the reality is you have a vape that's a hazard, it's a hazmat and it's a biohazard. So I took it to Staples and I say, here, I'd like to give you my electric toothbrush, and they said, we won't accept it, it's a biohazard. And then you see a vape, and a vape is a biohazard and hazmat. And so you now have, you know, daily disposable vapes that are literally, like, I mean, on average, I think it's like 61 a year. From 2020 to 2024, Altria basically said that there were 18 million adults 21 and over who smoked cigarettes. 6 million of those transitioned over a 2-year period to vapes. So now you literally have, it's billions of these vapes that are going in, and like the tobacco manufacturers, they can, if you take a battery and make it removable, you literally solve this problem. Because there is no place to put if you have a damaged battery, or if you have a biohazard, or, I mean, and you're talking billions of these, and it's like there's nowhere to take them. So you talk about a confused, you know, what are you going to do? Like, there's no place to take it.
So I'll put in a plug for the Healthcare Waste Institute, which is part of NWRA. We have our meeting on Thursday, and we'll be talking about vapes and medical devices with embedded batteries, and like you're talking about, things that have maybe infectious waste, hazardous waste, electronics, and the difficulty with the regulations, collection programs. How do you solve those kinds of problems? So just a plug for the Healthcare Waste Institute. Going back a second, on operations. So there's prevention, there's, you know, things that we've talked about to try to avoid these situations, but they still happen. So what separates a manageable event from a major fire? And maybe Chris, you can talk a little bit about what lessons you've learned about preparedness and, you know, employee response, drills, things.
Yeah, there's probably several different components to this, right? You know, manageable fires, you know, might have something to do with the size of the battery in play. You have one of those vape batteries, you know, pen batteries go up. That's one thing. If it's the battery from a significantly sized scooter that's going up, you know, presents a different risk. How your people are trained is a significant piece. Do they know how to handle a response event, you know, or not? And then as a fire gets started, what resources, what protections have you really put in place? You know, do you have a Fire Rover system in place? How well spec'd and maintained is your sprinkler system? Are you tied into a municipal water line? Are you relying on, you know, some sort of reserve water supply, you know, out there that may or may not run out? How well have you communicated with local fire response? Do they know your facility? Do they know how to get in, get out? Or when the day comes, are they actually going to face confusion in terms of getting in? They're going to the backside of the landfill and they can't find their way to the front, and they're losing kind of critical, you know, minutes as you go through there. And how well have you managed, you know, your material supply? Have you, you know, gotten behind the curve so that you have a real back pile of material out there that basically acts as tinder, or have you stayed on top of your supplies? You've got, you know, a manageable level of material on the tipping floor, or bailed around the outside of the material. All those things, you know, come into play. When some combination of those line up against you, that's when you start having things really go sideways.
And that's, I mean, so literally exactly what you just said is why you can't have an automated system, right? Fire Rover can be an automated system tomorrow, but to get it FM approved, you need to deal with someone who's dealing with all those different factors and making sure that they're making the right decisions during all those times, what to hit, what not to hit, all those things. And it's one of those where there are things that we've learned that has been ingrained in the industry as the right way to do things, and they're not the right way to do things. So like, pulling loader, have a loader pulling out a battery is not actually a smart thing to do. Now, 9 out of 10 times it works. It's actually amazing. But if you have a deep-seated fire, and again, we're blaming batteries. 50% of the fires that we see are not due to batteries. Batteries are literally a match that are sparking, right? So, you have a small battery, it lights a match, and now you have, an accelerant, and that's really where we see major fires. But a loader operator, you need to pre-wet the pile and then pull away top layers. And we learned this in rubber recycling, and actually, it was, and again, all these things we're learning in real time. I mean, 8 years ago, 9 years ago, 10 years ago, and we were still learning. But if a loader goes in and actually opens up to oxygen, it can literally pull out and start 3 other fires. And that's where you're seeing a major loss happen over why did something not just stay the way that it was. So we learn with our customers and we learn best practices, and this is where it's somebody in a software versus someone on the front lines making sure and seeing and studying and doing all the things that we're constantly doing with our customers. We are creating best practices right now because nobody knows what they are, including the fire departments and the insurers.
Can we dig into that a little bit deeper? You said there are some things that are, beliefs in the industry that are wrong. Are there other examples of that would be helpful for the audience, that, mistakes that you've seen or things that people need to maybe look at a little bit differently?
And I don't mean to, the biggest thing that I see is that if you're gonna fight a battery fire, you do not wanna do it with a handheld fire extinguisher, period. And there's all these guys out there selling that their solution is the solution to putting battery fires out. I can tell you guys now, there is not one company out there that has proven that they can do this. I'm not saying, I was on the NFPA 18A committee for basically pulling back the lithium-ion battery claims that were being made by a lot of these guys. And I'm not saying they're bad, but just like Chris has said, and everyone, there's no magic bullet. And so when Eric and I blew up those batteries at REMA a few years ago, there's toxic fumes that come off these. And your employees, if they're gonna be fighting these, they should be fighting them from outside with a CAF system or something that allows them to shoot far enough away from the fire. And Waste Management has a bunch of these on all of their tip floors, which allows you not to run in and every fire department. There's a guy, Chief Lipsky in Milwaukee, and he's, if you follow him on YouTube, he literally said, I do not like the Hero. Because the Hero thinks they've done things, but we literally have video of them coming in spraying. They can't see through darkness, they can't see through smoke, they're not doing anything except breathing this stuff in and walking out and thinking that they put the fire out. So that really is, it's people's actions that need to be educated through and really understood, and a lot of the really good operators are doing that.
I spoke with a fire inspector in my town recently, and he said that the state of New Hampshire has instructed them not to put out any battery fires, probably for some of the reasons that you're mentioning. Anything else on operations before we pivot?
It's two things that kind of strike me. The comment, or some of Ryan's comments, what they kind of inform from an operations standpoint is that you can't just say a battery fire, right? Because there's a lot of different types of lithium-ion battery fires, depending on the size of the battery, as Chris mentioned, depending on where in the pile it is. When you say what separates a big fire from a little fire, 3 to 5 minutes, right? But because it's actually not the battery fire that's generally the problem, right? If you take a battery, you could take an e-bike battery, a pretty substantial battery, and put it on a concrete floor and send it in thermal runaway, and it will burn and it will be spectacular and the smoke will be yucky and it will pop and fit, but it'll burn itself out pretty quickly. It's all of the other stuff that it sets on fire. So where is that lithium-ion battery fire in relation to the other consumables on the floor? And because in that 3 to 5 minutes, separating it is good when it's good versus digging it out when it's bad. So the fact that operationally you need to understand the differences in different types of battery fires, and and firefighters generally want to say, here's how many pounds or kilograms of of this specific type of plastic, and here's how many BTUs it's going to put off, and here's how much water we would have to have for it. You know, that doesn't work very well for lithium-ion batteries. But if New Hampshire is saying, we're not going to put out the battery fire, well, it's good, you're not going to, it's going to put itself out. But I hope that instead they're saying, I'm going to keep everything else around it cool enough to keep the battery from spreading to those, really it's a class A or class B fire that's the problem, it's not the battery fire.
And that's in waste and recycling. And again, just in our waste, in our electronic recycling and our manufacturers that we protect, it really is about cooling the areas, because you have literally pallets and pallets and pallets and pallets of these things. So it really is about cooling the collateral assets and making sure that the fire department comes in when they know they're ready. And that's really what, you know, it's a completely different operation than when you're dealing with MSW or a landfill fire. When you're giving, because I mean, 100% right. I mean, a battery will put itself out every time. It's what it's gonna burn.
So I will have some follow-up questions to my fire inspector when I get home.
Well, I would say too, I think it'll be interesting to have this panel next year and the year after. I mean, there are a lot of vendors out there chipping away to your good question about detection in cans, detection in trucks, detections on the tipping floor, certainly detection of lithium-ion batteries and sorting lines. You know, there are a lot of really good minds working at that, and I think, you know, there's a lot of potential for that to contribute to it. But the reality is, in the meantime, you know, it's really about the nuts and bolts of operations and fire preparedness and fire response, and then the public education piece, which you're probably getting ready to pivot to. So
Yes. Yeah. Let's talk about upstream prevention, and this is, you know, I find this really fascinating, the behavioral part and the systems that you can set up around it to help make it easier for people. But we've alluded to this, but just a statistic for everybody, the use of lithium-ion batteries is expected to increase 6-fold by 2030, which is not that far away. So, we're, you know, to your point earlier, we're talking trillions, and they're in our pockets, and they're everywhere. And people really aren't aware of the dangers, and they're putting them in the recycling, they're putting them in their trash cans. So let's talk about the role of public education and proper disposal, and what can industry do to work with manufacturers, to work with regulators, communities, consumers, to help start to address this part of the problem.
I think the easy shout out of the gate is, you know, congrats to NWRA. Love to see how they've leaned in with the Woodsy campaign and the public education piece. Several of us had the opportunity to be out at the Consumer Electronics Show. Woodsy was out there, the RV was out there. We were talking about battery safety in the heart of battery use, you know, the CES conference out there. So I think that was really nice. WM has been thrilled. Tara broke the news earlier today about we've added a 4th rule to our rules of recycling right. So in addition to the kind of nuts and bolts of, you know, recycle the things we tell you to recycle, don't put plastic bags, you know, in the mix, and no liquids, we're adding a formal 4th, you know, call out saying no batteries, you know, period, in the recycling stream. So we're gonna keep trying to push that. I think the question for you all is, if I asked everybody, put your hand up if you think batteries and battery fires are a significant problem, every hand in the room is going up. And then if you're within the industry and you're working there, keep your hand up if you really think that your company is doing everything they could to educate your customers, you know, across the board. I think a lot of hands go down. I think the call to action is now. We've got to really keep coming together as a sector to push public education, you know, out of the front, you know, and because we have so many touches, you know, with our customers, such an opportunity to keep educating them on the dangers. And I really do believe in the sort of better angels of people. If they know, and they know where the alternative, where they can go safely, you know, a lot of people can do that as long as it's not too hard, you know, for them. So
100%. And I mean, I think your biggest thing that I see, right? We had so much confusion for so long, and then you had every single organization trying to go at it alone, trying to educate, and they educated in a different way. And it's like, how do you get a national campaign that makes sense and bring everybody together and like make sure that people understand what this problem really is? And it's like you're starting to see, like, I did like an Investigate TV with Jeff Snyder from Rumpke, which, I mean, he's since left, but I mean, it just made national news, and he's really talking through. I mean, you know, the video starts with a guy who has a charger in his pocket and he burned his leg. right? So like the public's now seeing like what the waste and recycling operators have now seen forever, and they want solutions. And so like, you know, it's fortifying the front lines. How do we make sure that it is so easy to, you know, have that solution and take away confusion and everybody do the same thing? I mean, that's a really hard thing, right? And we need the leaders in the industry to really come together and actually have one voice, or, you know, at least a coherent voice that, you know, teaches the public. Because everyone in this room understands battery fires, but if you know, you sit there in a group of 20 people, I mean, they're like, oh, I heard about something like that.
I'm going to give Eric an opportunity to talk about the battery network and collection programs. I just want to give Sarah a heads up, then we'll have a couple minutes for audience questions. Do you want to add anything, Eric?
Yeah, when you look at some of the global leaders in battery collection, you know, generally in our space, in the nonprofit battery aggregation, we tend to look to Belgium because they have the most mature battery collection program in the world. And if you ask your cab driver, your Uber driver in Brussels, they will say, oh, you gotta recycle the batteries. But they all, now granted, it's a population and a geography, both roughly the size of Maryland, but they do focus on youth. And so you made a comment about that before. You know, one of the reasons that we've seen such a dramatic increase over the decades in wearing seatbelts, in stopping tobacco consumption, is because the focus was actually not on the person who was deciding to drive the car or deciding to smoke the cigarette. It was focusing on that generation, because our kids are really powerful. Dad, you don't have your seatbelt on. You know, Dad, don't smoke in the car. Dad. And so, you know, so that's a really powerful approach, but it takes a lot of time.
Dad, don't put that battery in the recycling bin. Go to NWRA's website, look for a location.
BatterySafetyNow.org.
Thank you.
And it's give a hoot, don't pollute. So, I mean, we did all learn it. So, I mean, it works.
Any questions from the audience before we wrap up? Yep. Sarah.
Oh, man. For those of you who missed it, Sarah just did a total fake handoff. That was a great move.
I almost yelled psych.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask Eric, we were talking about education and so forth, and the batteries themselves have some labeling on it. We talked about it in the first session that the EU has on there. Has the battery industry talked about what they could do from an education standpoint on the battery itself to indicate, you know, don't recycle, skip the bin?
Yeah, it is, and it's a really tough one because there's so many layers of obligated markings on batteries. So, for example, you will oftentimes see a PB, which is lead, on batteries on non-lead, on lithium-ion batteries because of the lead in the solder, right, which is totally unproductive in this type of conversation. And so the EPA Office of Resource Conservation and Recovery has some voluntary labeling workshops and sessions going on that the industry is very involved in. But there's absolutely an opportunity to put it where the battery is. Part of the problem too, though, and it's not just vapes, right? You're not going to see that on my mouse, on my phone.
Did they ever think of, if you buy a vape, you have to trade one in or they can't sell it to you?
I know there are some folks who are talking about potentially having a deposit program and what, what level that would have to be at.
You just can't get one if you don't give back the other one.
Well, last week, Maine, their governor just signed into effect, I see some nodding, so the first ever vape producer responsibility law in the country. And it's going to be a big challenge for BTI and the cannabis industry as well, because they're both going to be obligated under those. There's a whole different set of regulatory complexity. Nicotine is a P075 acute hazardous waste. There's commercial chemical product considerations. There are hazardous waste, but that law says that it's actually the nonprofit that would run the program. So whatever ends up managing it, comparable to the battery network, has to pay the consumer at a minimum $2 for every vape that they turn in. And so that's gonna, of course, be embedded in the COGS of the product itself. It's not as one for one, but that'll certainly get people to, Ryan will pick even more up off the street.
Well,
And then take them to Maine.
And again, like if you go to the UK, and I spent a lot of time, just studying the UK market for a lot of reasons, right? And like, it's taken us a long time to really get ourselves engaged there. And the one big thing that is, they basically banned single-use vapes, and it was a complete failure. And I'll tell you, in the UK, all the operators, all they do is talk about how many frickin' fires, BIFA went out and said they had 800,000 vapes in like a 2-month period. And I'm sure I'm screwing that up, but it's something like insane. So, that's a failure. So again, I look at it like, and it's easy for me to say, hey, tobacco industry, step up and do something. But the reality is it's a big supply chain. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of moving parts, and you gotta be careful what you're starting to regulate, because you cause unintended consequences for a lot of these things that, again, it's a room of someone a lot smarter than, myself to figure this stuff out and, figure out what.
It might pay for the waste industry to chip in on that, so to prevent the fire.
It's costing the industry $2.5 billion a year. So that's the insurance in the industry. I do have annual reports out here, and if anyone wants to read it, this is my 9th one, and I am uberly conservative, but it's $2.5 billion and growing.
So sorry.
I'm sorry, one last question. On your MRF facility, truck comes in, drops his load on the ground, okay, and you see a cigarette or a battery, hasn't exploded yet. What's your routine on what do they do?
Yeah, they'll typically pull it out of the waste stream, and we do have a number of our facilities, that work with Battery Safe and have different containers and receptacles.
Where do they put it in? What type of container?
You want to speak to that?
Yeah, the one.
Yeah.
Yeah, the battery safety product of the year for last year is a battery network innovation called One Drum, right? Because you can do a couple of different things. You can learn to identify it, you can learn to sort it, you can learn to package it, or you can get some purpose-built options that allow you to be able to put mixed batteries into a single place. They can ship safely. The challenge is, right, like we, even as a nonprofit, we're not a grants and bake sales nonprofit. We have to run a P&L as well, and so that's a fee-based item. So it's far less expensive than an increase in your insurance premiums, but it's the kind of, there's no free ride for dealing with them and managing them. So we can help with that, but the financial burden, the financial challenge still remains.
Right, we are at time. I'm going to give you each rapid fire, just real quick, anything you want to leave the audience with to take home.
I led with this, I'll finish with it. Start with your people. Really think about where they are, their daily experience, how they're encountering fires, what you can do to arm them with the best resources, both by way of training, but also by way of equipment in your facilities. Do right by your people, and you'll set yourself up for success down the road.
Yeah, the battery network is just that. We're a network. We're always continuing to look for organizations and entities to work with to be able to encourage responsible turn-in and recycling of batteries and battery-containing products. So if there's anybody interested in working with us, we love to partner.
Yeah, and I think, my biggest takeaway is that there is no silver bullet, and I really appreciate, Chris saying that, because the reality is, like, Fire Rover is not your answer, right? Fire Rover is a part of the solution, and it's a number of different layers, but there are so many other things, best practices, other technologies, like X-ray vision, and all these things that we're doing. It's a piece of it, but it's like, bad operators have more fires than good operators, and good operators have less fires than bad operators. So we really gotta, it takes a village on this. So it really is one of those things that, we're gonna be working on this problem for a long time. Probably like past the time I'm already 50. So at this point, hopefully we'll
everybody to Ryan's earlier point, everybody in this room is going to be dealing with the lithium-ion batteries that are already in the field for the rest of their career.
Yeah.
So as Chris said, it might be interesting.
That positive.
But it might be interesting to come back in future years and see how things have progressed. So thank you to the panel. Thank you, everyone.